Welcome to the Regen Brands podcast. This is a place for consumers, operators, and investors to learn about the consumer brands supporting regenerative agriculture and how they're changing the world. This is your host, Kyle, joined with my co-host, AC. Let's dive in.
On this episode, we have Joni Kindwall-Moore, who is the founder and CEO at Snacktivist Foods. Snacktivist is supporting regenerative agriculture through their regenerative and ancient grain-based baking mixes and ingredients. In this episode, we learn about Joni's journey from ethnobotany and nursing to being a CPG entrepreneur, her vision to scale ancient regenerative grain production, and the unique challenges of both running a CPG startup and raising capital as a female entrepreneur. Joni is so full of energy and bringing a ton of ingenuity and grit to a really complex piece of our agricultural system. We really enjoyed having her on the show. Let's go. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Regen Brands podcast. We are pumped to have Joni from Snacktivist Foods with us here today. So welcome, Joni. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you guys today.
We're super pumped to have you. And as somebody, I'm not super familiar with Snacktivist. I did some research ahead of the podcast. But for those who don't know your company, give us like a quick lay of the land. What do you make? Where can you be bought today? And just kind of give us that general overview.
Okay, well, our goal at Snacktivist is to make delicious grain-based foods from regenerative ingredients that are allergy-friendly, soil, water, and carbon-focused, all while radically impacting human nutrition. So it's like a big goal play, and we look at that as like a process of peeling like an onion, like there's layers to that. And so we've started with a line of baking mixes and a frozen line of finished products for food service to grow our supply chains in a way that we could still, manage all the different layers of what it takes to get a product from field to consumer. So right now you can buy our baking mix line, places like Thrive Market, great partner, the usual suspects like Amazon and our own website, snacktivistfoods.com. But you can also find our products soon at like Harmon's. We are growing in retail slowly but surely and have a passion for chefs. We think chefs are amazing evangelizers for new foods and new food experiences. So we do sell into food service as well, but it's often not as much of like a brand present play. So sometimes you eat it and you don't know.
Makes sense.
Nice.
Love it. Love
it. Nothing better than like sneaky regenerative food. It's that's pretty rare. I feel like this is a category that's usually when you don't know what your food is, it's probably not very good. So like a sneaky regen brownie is like, man, that's really awesome.
Yeah. And that's definitely happening, which is kind of exciting. And what's even cooler about that is not only is it sneaky regenerative, but a lot of our chefs don't say it's allergy inclusive, vegan, gluten-free or anything. They're like, that's just the best damn brownie I've ever had. They just put it on the menu and people love it. And then when the customer who needs that special type of dietary accommodation asks, they're like, oh, we didn't realize that the brownies on the menu are totally appropriate for us. That's fantastic. So we think that's the future. It's not a free from future. It's a full of future. We need to get that straight from the beginning.
Love that. And the data on like the food service versus retail and the offerings available on like the natural organic side, like it's so compressed in food service versus retail. And so we need more of those offerings at food service for sure.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And then from a business model, like when you're really trying to build, farmer connected supply chains and you look at like the cash management cycle versus the operations cycle, like to have a more diversified sales channel approach gives you more stability and more security, like working with your farmers that, you're not like, oh, well, we're waiting to hear back from, like all these retail players. We don't know how long that's going to take. We don't know how soon they're going to pay us. There's a real strength to looking at both channels as a strategy.
Yeah. Tim from Philosopher Foods was like, you can't have a monoculture revenue stream. You got to have diversified.
Yeah.
You're going to have biodiversity in the supply chain. You got to have biodiversity in the revenue. Yeah.
That's a great way of putting it. That's super cool.
We're kind of going a little off topic, but with the food service question or the food service topics coming up, I'm really interested. Like, what does transparency look like from the food service play? Are there any of your food service partners who are revealing like, hey, we do use Snacktivist, or can you reveal any of those partners with us so that we know we want to support those outlets?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Right now, most of our food service people, some of them do like they'll tag us in social media. Those tend to
Mhm.
be smaller players, but we're now starting to launch into larger, partnerships that are food service focused, and we're working on how we leverage that marketing and that
Mhm.
brand communication. And most of them so far are like proud of doing business with us. Like one of the motivators with larger food service customers too is they're like, you're WeBank certified and we want to support women-led enterprises. And so
Mhm.
there's like this growing momentum to want to talk about pride and partnership. And I think that that's like an ever evolving thing, and it's accelerating. Like 3 years ago, nobody really wanted to go there. And this year I'm finding more and more people want to tell that story. So I
Mhm.
can't really talk about the big ones yet because they're like in the process of closing, but
Yeah.
we're really hoping by Q1, Q2 next year, we do have some larger food service partners that are proudly saying, like, we're powered by Snacktivist. Like, our grain supply chain is not just commodity garbage anymore. We're
Mhm.
innovating there, and we're trying to rebuild the foundation and staples of American food system.
Love it.
Super exciting.
And
Mm-hmm.
you've obviously have some very audacious goals from what you've said to us, Joni, and you're
Yeah,
you're a
guess
very
so.
dynamic person and personality and background that's kind of converging from these different areas of human health and CPG and all these things to kind of be who you are and create this company. So take us
Yeah.
through how all that has happened because I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it is a strange process. And for the longest time, I was like, why is my career path doing this? It seems so like non-linear. But and now in hindsight, it's kind of fitting together. And I guess it's that
Mhm.
whole like, you know, um, loving your fate thing. And at the time, you're
Mm.
like, what the hell's going on? Like, I don't freaking get this at all. And then you're like, okay, Amor Fati, we got this. Like, it's fine.
Mhm.
So I started out in farming. Like little town in rural Oregon, which really our economy there was driven by fishing, timber, and farming. So very resource extraction type upbringing. We had animals, but we were a teeny farm. Both my parents had jobs off the farm, so it wasn't like our primary source of income. But
Mhm.
still we had to like go tend to the critters in the morning before school, and I was just always one of those kids like I could field dress a deer by the time I was in high school. Like just that kind of like rural redneck upbringing. but in hindsight, I was kind of embarrassed about it. Like I was a vegan in college. I was like, oh God, I'm not going to admit that to my friends here at U of O.
Wow.
But like, cause I just was like, if I'm not willing to kill it, I'm not willing to eat it. Cause I know what that entails. Like we'd have cattle and we'd make friends with them. We'd take care of them and then off they'd go to the butchers. So
Mhm.
it's just that really real raw sense of like where food comes from and what sacrifices are made to like get it to your plate has always been very
Mhm.
real to me.
Mhm.
And so when I went off to college, I loved the hard sciences. So I went into like ethnobotany as a profession was really my
Mm.
focus. So I did get a degree in botany, and my whole focus there was like I did pre-med because I thought maybe I'd go into the medical sciences, but pharmaceutical chemistry and botany and where they came together and that rub spot was really like my sweet spot, like
Mm.
ethnopharmacology. So I did have some really cool experiences in like
Hold on, can you
a
just pause real quick? I have no
yeah.
idea what ethnopharmacology means. Can you, can you just
It
give
is
us like a
nerdy.
quick like
I'm so happy you
layman's
asked and I
version
didn't
of
have to.
what it is that means? Yeah, I want to be able to like really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's because it is really important, like especially when you think about what we're trying to accomplish with Snacktivist now. Like ethnopharmacology is purely the study of like what people have used for medicinal application historically. So it's a combination of anthropology, pharmacology, and botany because frequently these were botanically extracted things. Although we did do a fair amount of research on animal extracted things like these really exotic snails from Borneo that we were exploring for like pharmaceutical, curare is a really good example from frogs in the Amazon. But they first noticed that they should study the frogs from the Amazon because of how the ethnopharmacological practice was used on prey during hunting in the Amazonian basin. So like it's like the study of people and how they use plants and how they use animals, and then taking it down to the molecular level to see if there's some molecular application that we could really isolate and use in therapeutic application, like in cancer research or novel therapeutics, or even in the nutraceutical application. And I did work in the nutraceutical, like herbal extract industry for a while as well. So, but, really at the core of it, it's trying to take all those empirical observations of, hey, these, people have historically used X for health. And what does that mean from a like chemical standpoint? Let's really research it. Let's see. And what was really important about that is during that time, we were collecting samples from all over the world, actually. And, but we would do initial evaluation just using like what we call thin layer chromatography, which is like, you extract them and you run it across a plate. It's like a little electrophoresis type of plate, like from the movies. That's what it looks like. It's a little different than that. But as it moves, it like lays down a little track of the different chemicals. And I'd be like, this is really weird because I collected this in this part of Montana, and this one was from Western Washington, and this one got flown in from California, and they were all grown in different situations. And this chromatography plate is slightly different. Same species, same exact part, all of that should be the same. And that's when I started really looking at like community driven chemistry when it comes to ecosystem as a driver. So Nerdville, we can back up, but that's really what pharmacology is all about.
I love it. No, my brain's trying to comprehend everything you just said, and it sounds to me like potentially like the different bioavailable nutrients in the soil from those different geographies could be impacting the chromatography results.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, what we started to realize is that it was the ecosystem drivers, like, hey, companion planting or, different gradients of a hillside that create different heat and water stress. All these things actually created a different chemical profile in these plants. And in some cases, actually, it made for presence and absence of different chemicals. So we were like, okay, these are genetically identical plants, but there are environmental stressors that are producing them or that are causing them to produce completely different chemical profiles, which is really fascinating. So that really has laid the ground of a lot of what our thinking is today. When you look at polyculture and you look at like aggressive crop rotations and how that, really like dramatically affects the rhizosphere, and how the rhizosphere dramatically affects the actual end health of the plant that we end up eating or our livestock ends up eating. And I think that there's a lot of magic there that's overlooked in the food system.
Wow.
Yeah. So nerdy. I mean, that is nerdy. But that's the world my brain lives in.
Yeah, but take us from ethnobotany to CPG founder entrepreneur. What was the
the
journey there?
I was doing just kind of lackey science work because I was like just field work and bench work, and my husband was an RN, and we had a chance to move up to Alaska, and he was working at really remote bush hospitals and working for the Indian health the health system, Indian health system.
Wow.
And he'd come home and have these amazing stories about like, what'd you do today? Well, this woman came in and she had a baby and the doctor didn't get there in time. So we just did it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's like so cool. I kind of want to have that immediate gratification when I go to work of like, someone tried to die and we saved them today. So, so I went and got, I already had pre-med. So I went and got an RN as a second bachelor's. And then I spent over a decade as an RN, mostly in ICU, ER, and diabetic education. Wow. And again, really looking at like diet as a fundamental driver to disease. And it really opened my eyes to a lot of the ways that we think about diet in our modern healthcare system are so wrong, even from a perspective of people who are health conscious. There's still like a real disconnect about like microbiome and digestive health and things that go beyond just selecting good quality, like good food choices, because a lot of, attempts to eat well in our country are still grossly undernourished or grossly, under quality because of farming methods. And I think that creates a lot of frustration for people like managing weight, managing diet related disease, because they're like, I feel like I'm following the rule books. My doctor's telling me to eat this way. I'm confused because I get on the internet and I don't know what to do. One place says this, another place says this. And I think that, that's a huge place. So as a medical person, I'm sitting in the ICU one day and it's cardiovascular ICU in that particular unit. It's all like post vascular disease like heart attack, stroke, etc. And I was like, okay, literally 80% of the people on this unit are here for diet-related disease. And when they finally wake up and we start feeding them, we're like giving them like a Otis Spudmaker muffin, like something that is like the epitome of toxic food in my mind.
Right.
But the other thing I noticed is like no one wakes up after like anesthesia when they're like feeling as shitty as they've ever felt in their entire life and asks for freaking kale chips and raw almonds. Like, no, that does not happen. Like, and little kids too. Like, and so I was like, okay, where's this rub spot? What do people want to eat? What is like the cultural significance of food and food types that are very meaningful to people and have historical deep roots in their like cultural identity? And grains and comfort foods there's a reason they're called comfort foods, are like so significant in like the diet ethos globally. Everywhere you go in the world, it's the same. And I have been on every continent except Antarctica and always studying people and what drives them with food. And it's like, I was like, we have got to completely take back our grain sector because people love it. It plays a vital role in nourishing the microbiome, but the grains that are available today make it to where I can see why everybody shuns them, because they're like, they pale in what they used to be. Like they've been like totally driven through genetic selection and agricultural, processes and manufacturing processes to just be refined starch sources.
Totally. How much arable land is used to grow grains? So
oh my gosh,
you talk about taking back a sector of usable land and like improving the soil there. I mean, the huge potential impact.
Oh gosh. And then you think about like, not only is that a huge footprint, just like acreage wise, a huge driver for pollution. You talk to farmers, and farmers who are growing grains are under intense financial strain. They're looking at their monocrop systems and they feel trapped. And so immediately when I started studying ancient grains and I started really doing like more the ethnopharmacological, ethnobotanical evaluation of ancient grains globally around the world. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like not only do these provide that cereal type connection of like, oh, it's comfort food, it's a grain, it can be floured, it can be made into things. They're very healthy. I mean, they have superior nutritional profiles to many of our typical commodity grains that we're eating today. And then see a lot of our farmers are like, oh my gosh, we want to grow this for you because we need diversity in our farming system. Like it's one of the things that's holding us back from progression is that we're kind of stuck on this, treadmill where we're only growing 2 crops because nothing else has a value stream. And so, in talking to farmers, they were like, please create value streams for these other crops. Cause, every farming system is different when you go around the world, and they all have different needs, and no food companies are driving product development based on that need. They're forcing farmers to fit their needs. Right. And that, that's just the way it works. And I really think we need to change that paradigm. We need to talk to farmers and go, okay, so if you grow more cowpeas in your farming system, you're going to reduce your need for exogenous or like input nitrogen, synthetics or organic, just input nitrogen. If we can eliminate inputs, that's great, right? But they're like, there's very little market for cowpeas. I'm like, what the hell are cowpeas? I'm like, they're black-eyed peas. Like this was a few years back. I'm like, why are the farmers calling them cowpeas and the people in the market are calling them black-eyed peas? No wonder there's no market connector. We don't know. So so those we're piloting things with cowpeas, by the way, so we can like be that driver in the marketplace someday.
That's really interesting. And one of the things that strikes me that I find particularly interesting and compelling about your story so far is you started in, I'm going to butcher it, ethnobotanical pharmacology. Was that right?
That'll work. Hey, ethnopharmacology. Yeah.
Golf clap for you, Kyle.
Yeah. Good
I've
job.
just been saying that word in my head this whole time. Just trying not to forget.
Ethnopharmacology or ethnobotany. That's a little simpler.
Ethnobotany. Okay, perfect. So we started,
and that includes like timber and stuff too.
Right. But so we started in that sector, and you had mentioned, working in like pharmaceutical development. So basically treating like post illness is where your career started. And then it's sort of like, as you went down the rabbit hole, you started getting into like preventative illness. And that led you to like the health of, the food that people are consuming, the nutrient density in that food, the bioavailability of nutrients, soil health, and all these other things. So I just think that's a really interesting route to go.
Weird trajectory.
So continue down the origin story of you're in this place where you're talking to farmers about what they can grow to improve, or reduce the amount of inputs they have. How does that lead to Snacktivist?
Yeah, so the final piece of the puzzle there was I've always had a lot of food allergies, and go figure, we always had chickens my entire life. I am so allergic to eggs. Weird, right?
Oh, wow.
And always have been
yeah.
from the get-go?
Yeah, even as a kid, they just they made me really sick when I was a kid, so I always avoided them. And then as I entered adulthood, there was something I was reacting to and we couldn't figure it out. So we finally did blood work, and they're like, oh my gosh, your blood antigen reactivity to egg whites is off the charts. So you need to really be reading every label, even in small quantities. You really, because I'd have to take an antihistamine because my eyes would get all puffy and itchy, and then systemic too, stomach ache, upset stomach, it's just not even worth it. Poultry in general. And so, we've long tried to figure out what happened there. And, I got very, very ill as a child. I was hospitalized for quite some time and had a lot of aggressive antibiotics. And I think at that period, I came home and my microbiome was sterilized essentially. And I probably went out and cleaned the chicken coop or something. And at that time I had a sensitization event. I don't remember that, of course, because I was a kid. I was 6. Who pays attention? But, in talking to different doctors and scientists, they were like, oh, that's probably where that happened. And it was a gut microbiome thing. So again, so I'm sitting there in the ICU. My kids also have food allergies, weird. Even though we've always tried to eat healthy, always ate as much organic as we could. I'm that mom that my kids are really embarrassed of their school lunches. Now they're rebelling. Very, my mom, my son came home one day. He's like, why do you insist on just sending hippie food to school? I just trade it with all the other kids for Doritos anyhow, Mom. Why stop? Give it up. So I was like, yeah, but they have food allergies too. And so I was like, we really just need to start a food brand that can provide this stuff. And what I found very unique about my science background is that in formulating foods from novel whole grain flours that have never been really used in a sophisticated culinary application, on a European bakery level, right? It's different. I mean, and I'm not meaning that in any way, to where they're in use in a traditional sense. That is sophisticated as well. But no one had done that fusion movement really of can we force sorghum to make an amazing European style bread, like a sourdough? Very few people had really dabbled with that. And there were some problems, but luckily, just having that nutraceutical training, I was like, oh, we can fix this. I know there's ways we can create molecular scaffolding to create awesome loft with, sourdoughs, using natural things, not using as many creepy additives like you get in a lot of gluten-free foods. You look at the label, you're like, what the hell is this stuff? I'm not eating that. That's gross. And so people loved our products. And so early on, we had chefs that were like, oh my gosh, I don't know what you're doing, but keep it up because this is fantastic food. I would serve this regardless of allergy status. And so we knew we were onto something from a brand perspective. Maybe we should just start selling this. And of course, through naivety, having no idea what it would take to create a CPG brand. Oh, it'll be easy, they say. No, well, they don't say it's easy. I was like, well, we'll just start a company and we'll do this. And I was working full time at the hospital. My husband was too, and we had 3 kids under the age of 3rd grade. So it's been a slow growth.
Just a quick little side hustle project of building a CPG brand, on the side.
A disruptive one.
Full-time jobs and raising kids.
I know, yeah. So it's not been as fast as I would have liked it to, just because life, and not having money to start. We were we're nurses. We don't have we didn't have any pool of money to get this off the ground. So funny, I earned very early on, I was like, okay, we have issues with supply chain. We need to do some disruptive technologies in supply chain and all this stuff. And I pitched it to an accelerator and they were like, we appreciate that you're really enthusiastic about disrupting agriculture as we know it and commodities as we know it. But you're a mom from Idaho and you're a nurse. No one is going to believe you. What the hell are you make brownies. That's believable. If you pitch to investors that you make a great brownie and you can take it to market, people will believe you. But all this other stuff, they're going to think you're insane.
Yeah.
So Yeah. So we've
Well,
had to kind of move slowly.
I gotta interject. So my sister's a nurse. So shout out to my sister Maggie, who's an avid Regen Brands podcast listener. Appreciate you, Mags. And nurses are
Yeah.
so important. So love that you have that background as well, Joni. And we've heard this from so
Thank
many
you.
people now. Yeah, absolutely. We've heard this from so many people now, and Kyle and I can relate from our own personal health stuff. Like Dr. Zach Bush talks about, he got everyone on kale and spinach, and they were still having issues because of they're drenched in glyphosate, right? Or
Yeah.
we see all the gluten issues now, and there's a link to all the agrochemicals, like for sure, instead of just the grains. And maybe the grains are problematic themselves, but
yes, exactly. It's a systems thing.
So,
we're not going to fix it with a free from thing, or like radical elimination is not going to fix the problem. It might help with minimizing the symptoms. Like, oh, I cut out wheat and I feel better, but it's still not getting to the root of it. Because for most people, it has nothing to do with gluten. It's a very dynamic picture as to why they can't tolerate wheat. If they're not celiacs, sorry, celiacs that are listening, but that's a very specific physiological condition. But nurses are in a position of really interesting observation. And I think historically nurses have been really overlooked in that capacity. Like, follow out the orders. That's your job. You're not supposed to think too hard about it. Just do what you're told. But the thing is like it's so sad, because the nurses are the ones that are at the bedside and actually hear the full picture and see the full picture and record the data. And we see things that the physicians don't see because we have the luxury of time with the patient. And unfortunately the medical system is not leveraging that.
And I think the thing to drive all the way home for the consumer on the regen side is, if you want to change how you feel, or if you want to change your human health outcomes, it's not just about changing what you eat. It's about figuring out how what you eat is actually grown, because it's just as important. And I think that's something that all of us on this call are very passionate about. And we have to continue to tie regen to that to scale it.
Right. And it's not, I wish I could make it super simple. Like, it'd be so much easier, but it's like this macro system picture. And there's so many layers of like, where do you start to unravel this? Like, I mean, I thank God there's a huge movement in regenerative beef, and that's creating a market drive that will allow us to bring more livestock back onto the farm, because there's a financial incentive that will help pay for that to happen. And so we need that to happen across all the verticals of our farming system and food system, so that the whole engine comes to life. And I feel like grains are often row cropping is kind of overlooked. It's not as pretty to photograph as like, some cattle out grazing or, other things like that. So, but when I talk to row croppers and what of a footprint that they make on the land, for me, that's an immediate first place to really push hard.
Well, take us there, right? Like take us regen grains. Like, what is that? Because I think it's way more hard to understand than maybe regen beef or some of the animal stuff. And
it is. It's a much tougher picture, I think, to take on, because with beef, it's a single ingredient. It's usually consumed as a single ingredient.
Yeah.
So that alone makes it much simpler. When you're looking at things that are grown in a row cropping system, or like a large agricultural footprint, because of the way that like modern mechanized farming works, we do have to have a degree of like, hey, this big strip at the very least is all one species, or there's multiple strips of species that can be harvested at different times to make it economically viable, because we do still have to feed a lot of people and also a lot of livestock. We're not ready for everyone to go to grass-fed, pasture-raised animals. Like, the infrastructure needed to go there is going to take time. And so the vast majority of people who are eating animal products today globally are eating ones that came from some sort of CAFO operation of varying sizes. Even if they're organic, they're really still kind of CAFO style, like confined animal feeding units. Like that's what they are. And what are those animals eating? Like, it's important that ancient grains as a driver for biodiversity, for nutrition and farming, is also applied to animal feed, because like our friends over at Dryland Genetics, they're working on proso millet as a focus. And they did some really interesting studies in that they found that if just by switching chicken feed from 100% corn to proso millet and I can't remember the exact like ratio it was, but it saved 16 gallons of water per egg in a CAFO situation. And so like those are those things where I feel like there's a much bigger conversation that needs to be had. And I talked to like Nebraska Sorghum Board and about the politics of like why cattle and feedlots are just eating corn, GMO corn, when there's so many reasons to diversify the corn belt. And a lot of it has to do with politics. Like they used to actually predominantly eat sorghum. And in the 80s, the lobbying bodies were basically able to get them to say commit to just the corn. And that switch has driven a whole agricultural system that is really depleting the soils of the Great Plains. And not that, monocrop sorghum is going to save anything, but the more that we can put in diversity, like millets, sorghums, tefts, broadleaf cereals like quinoa, they're not grains, they're seeds, amaranths, like all these different things. You think about how that conditions. Yeah.
Let me pause you there, Joni, because I think the average consumer listening to this, out of every word you've said of all the different grains, they probably recognize quinoa and maybe none of the others, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
We're foodies, like amaranth, sorghum, millet, like milo, cowpeas, like I guess just give a little color on like what the hell is that? Why does that matter? What's going on?
And that's like such a fascinating topic too, because like we used to eat like 200, 300 years ago, the diversity of our food staples from a genetic perspective was like very, very rich. And in the last 100 years, we've eliminated 90% of the genetic diversity and 75% of all varieties.
Wow.
And
say that again, Joni, say it again.
We've eliminated 90% of the genetic diversity and 75% of the varieties of food that we subsist on every day. Jeez. And we've narrowed that down to the world's global calories, mainly consisting of corn, wheat, and soy, whether you're eating grains or eating like chicken or beef or whatever, because they're also eating corn, wheat, and soy. And when you think about that, like the gravity is insane. Like that's insane. And so there's a race to bring back these crops that humans used to live on because we used to have very diverse diets. And the millets are one huge family because they are considered global commodities. In Africa, in India, in China, the millet family is considered a very significant staple. So that includes sorghum, which is a large, huge cereal. It kind of looks like corn. They make sorghum syrup out of it. And in the South, and it's also called Milo.
You can buy puffed sorghum cereals.
Yeah, you can.
There's one. There's a few others.
Yes.
So yeah, you can find it in a couple different aisles.
Yeah, and popped sorghum is fantastic. In fact, like back in 2015, when we were toying with just launching Snacktivist, we thought about launching popped sorghum as a first play. But we couldn't afford the minimums at the co-packer to make it happen. And we didn't have a sorghum popping facility, so we couldn't do it. But there are some other
Hold on,
players.
I just gotta pause. I popped my own sorghum recently because I'm a big popcorn fan, and I like to support small varieties of different grains. And what I found really interesting in the popping process is I thought I did it wrong, but only about half of the kernels, I don't even know if that's the right term, only about half of them actually popped. And I was like, well, and they're also tiny. I was really
they are tiny.
I was like, okay, so now I'm going to sort through these tiny little popped guys to figure out which ones have or haven't popped. So, long story short, if somebody could actually do a popped sorghum so I don't have to do that on myself, that would be fantastic because I would love to not have to do that ever again.
You're such a lazy millennial. It's unreal.
And, honestly, the ones that come from a commercial popper, I think that they hydrate it before they pop it or something so that you get like a bigger pop. Like I just find that it's a little less infuriating to eat because it's like got better texture and it sticks together a little bit more. But there are some issues I still think that to popped sorghum that need to be navigated through to make it American friendly. And, and we've been playing around with that. Like we have a really cool R&D kitchen here in Northern Idaho where when we have time. Right now, I haven't had as much time as I'd like, but we do some really cool product development experiments. And sorghum is one of our focuses. Sorghum and proso millet are our kind of neglected cereal crops of focus for the next year. We are passionate about some legumes as well, like I mentioned before, because they're drivers in those regenerative systems and they need a value add that is profitable to help drive that system. And so we're looking at developing products that integrate all those crops that are needed, that all need some love and all need some, pull economically to make them more viable for farmers to plant. So sorghum is definitely a biggie.
I just want to touch on that point real quick, just to make sure that our listeners can understand. You're saying that row crops, grains, and cereals often need to be planted with a different type of crop, and legumes generally complement that very well because of how it fixes the soil. And the important thing about legumes is it adds another cash crop that the farmers can sell because there is an actual market for most legumes.
Yeah, and then you're growing protein, and so that's an interesting thing. So for most farmers over the last few decades, from what I understand, the only legume that's had a real pull economically has been soy because it's been heavily lobbied. There's a lot of incentivization from the government, from the subsidy programs to switch to that. Where when you look at the diversity in the legume sector, not all legumes fix nitrogen at the same rate. And not all of them treat the soil the same. They have different root development. And there's a real reason why, farmers in Nebraska like to plant mung beans. There's a lot more to legumes than just the ones that most are commonly grown. And right now there's a spike in demand for garbanzo beans. So a lot of farmers are I want to grow garbanzos. And that's cool too, but we need diversity. I mean, that's the thing that we often forget. It's to help revitalize our agricultural sector that's focused on grains, we need to bring diversity back to the equation. We need to get back to that picture where our food system was not reliant on 3 major crops. It's reliant on a multitude of crops. And, we're trying to develop a tool that helps to measure what our farmers' diversity index is on their particular farms. Each year, are they able to add in a new layer of diversity? Are they bringing in additional crops that they're rotating? Are they experimenting with a cover crop that's new? Are they experimenting with a polyculture approach or, perennial stands that don't get plowed and act as reservoirs for both microbiome in the soil and for, above ground critters too, like insects, etc., pollinators, and are they bringing in livestock? Where are they at on that biological journey of creating an ecosystem instead of a desert that grows a couple of items?
Joni,
that is a fundamental shift.
For the audience, let's do this. This would be a fun exercise, I think. The standard, we won't give it a name or say a brand, the standard pancake mix on a Walmart shelf. Yeah. What's in it and how is it grown? What does the growing conditions look like? And then the Snacktivist pancake waffle mix, what's in it? How is it grown? Just draw that contrast for the audience.
I'm glad you asked these questions because I get lost in nerdland all the time, as you can tell. And so, it's just where I live. It's kind of scary. But you look at our Snacktivist Ivory Teff pancake mix, and then you look at one of our primary competitors that is based on non-organic wheat. And it probably is just wheat flour. It probably has a leavening agent. It might have powdered eggs and it might have powdered buttermilk in it. God knows where any of that came from. It's probably heavily glyphosated. There's no testing. It's probably at a better price point than ours is. It probably tastes great. I mean, people love them. I mean, my kids love them too. However, they're usually lower. Even the whole wheat ones, they tend to be kind of in a league of their own. But if you look at just the regular bleached enriched white flour ones, even if they're another gluten-free one and they're really reliant on white rice flour, tapioca starch, really things that are void of nutrition fundamentally, essential nutrients, things you see on the profile, which is a very small snapshot of what's actually in a plant. But then you look at the lack of phytochemical vitality too, minerals, trace minerals, antioxidants that are naturally present. They're usually very void of all of that stuff. And they drive that monocrop concept that we see in the commodity system where, all of our food diversity on the shelf is still based on the same couple of crops. And so I'm always kind of in the regenerative CPG movement, I don't understand why, I feel sometimes I'm one of the few that is heavily advocating for biodiversity in our crop rotations, because that is a driver of all regenerative systems. It's the 3 Bs: biodiversity, biomimicry, and biologicals. Those are the drivers of regenerative systems. I like that. And I call it the 3 Bs of regenerative because like all the tools that everyone fights about, well, they all fit under those umbrellas. And it's like, and it gives you a little more flexibility. Like as long as you're always driving those 3 Bs intentionally, you're working towards regeneration. And so I would like to see more CPG brands out there, like, you know, bringing in more of that diversity. Like Bob's Red Mill has led the way. They're an amazing brand. I have so much respect for them. People are like, they're a competitor of yours. I'm like, they're amazing. Like they kind of laid the foundation for re-exploration of diversity in our cereal and pulse sector. And to my knowledge, they treat their farmers well, although I don't know if they're taking regenerative on as an intentionality. So maybe that's one place where we could be differentiated from them. Because we are working with farmers of like, hey, farmers, what do we need to do to make your practice better? How can we make products that are going to directly impact your practice and directly impact human health?
So I just want to give Bob's a quick shout out. I represented Bob's Red Mill back in 2012. And I think at that time they had just introduced their line of ancient grains. I'm talking the sorghums, the tefs of the world, amaranth, and I think there were a few others in there that I can't remember anymore. And that was really in the aisle. I remember resetting the aisles like different Whole Foods, and they were the only ones who had that stuff in pack. So kudos to them. The only ones. There was nobody else. You couldn't buy that at a Whole Foods anywhere else. There's no other brand doing anything like that. So kudos to Bob's Green Early and to Whole Foods for supporting them and bringing it in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have so much respect for the work that they've done because it's really laid the foundation for all of us that are coming behind to leverage that. They are the spear tip of that. And so, you know, for us, like drought resistant crops are a huge focus for our brand. And so, you know, back to this differentiation, you know, Bob's Red Mill, I never actually critique them because I have so much healthy respect for them. I feel like I've always wanted to collaborate with them in some way. I don't know how that would ever look, but better together when you're trying to make the world better. Right. And so, you know, but like I look at our pancake mix, like the first 2 ingredients are whole grain ivory teff and whole grain proso millet flour. And those are like, you know, really important crops for driving that diversification and also for farmers who are under extreme drought conditions that are like our California farmers that, you know, they used to grow wheat and it's just year after year failing. And there are some fantastic small farmers that we've worked with that have now shifted to all teff and millet and sorghums because they only get just enough irrigation in the spring to get things started. And then they're cut off and their wheat they found either didn't meet spec or it just didn't even survive without the additional irrigation, which again brings us back to the second B of regenerative, which is biomimicry. We should be growing crops that are suited for the environments in which they're grown rather than relying on artificial irrigation or artificial things to make them, to coax them to grow against the force of nature. And so in California, I'm a huge advocate and I've, you know, Claudia Carter, the director of the California Wheat Commission, and I have so many amazing conversations about how do we diversify California in the grain sector. Like California wheat is getting more and more difficult because of the pressure of climate change. How do we make a like economic case for non-commodity crops for those farming systems because they can't grow spec wheat anymore? Even if they're growing wheat, it's not meeting spec. So it's not going into like the value channels that make the profit margins work, if that makes sense.
Why aren't they making spec? Is that because the water cut off?
Yeah. So the spec sheets that drive a lot of the commodity purchasing system are based on very specific nuances in like the actual spec sheets of that crop. Like they harvest it, they send it off for testing. Barley, same thing. If it doesn't meet these exact specifications, they're like, well, that's animal feed. I mean, I do that too with our sorghum and our proso and whatnot, but what the California Wheat Commission has also shown that you can still make fantastic human grade products from non-spec wheat or wheats that are super resilient or wheat hybrids like triticale, which is like a wheat and rye hybrid. And it's a modern grain. It's not an ancient grain, but it's a grain that has significance when it comes to climate resilient agriculture because you can beat the crap out of it and it still produces a yield. But these big food companies are like, we don't know what to do with this. It doesn't meet spec. But their lab has shown, look at these amazing crackers, look at these amazing breads. Like, we can make food out of them, but they're reliant on little scrappy pirate ship companies like mine to say, we can do this. Like, we can make an awesome cracker out of chilikeli. Like, let's take it to market. I mean, and we're working on, how that could look down the road as we really honor that neglected crops philosophy.
Let's switch gears for a second, because I do want to make sure we cover one thing, which is, and I'm going to tee this up, so give me a little bit of time.
Okay.
Fundraising with someone with your background and fundraising as a woman. Because look, we've been intentional with having as many female entrepreneurs of Regen Brands, I think, in the first 11, 12, I think this 13th episode, like that's on purpose.
Yeah.
And you just closed an oversubscribed round. So clearly you're still getting it done, but I know it's been a slugfest. So
it's been hard. Yeah.
Talk about that.
It has been hard. I mean, I have to say, like, I came into the world of being an entrepreneur and a CEO, from the operating view of like academics and medical system, which both academics and medical system have a long-standing ethos of women being in power, like positions of power. They're in management. You look at CEOs of hospitals, they're largely men, but in hospitals and in academics, like, it's not unusual to have a very high percentage of women in positions of decision making. Fast forward into fundraising, business, venture, food and ag, especially.
Yeah.
Wow. I was not prepared. And I just kind of, me and my golden retriever, attitude came in like, okay, it's no problem. We can get past this, right? Let's make friends. And the power of that bias, and it's often an unconscious bias that people aren't aware of. Even the best intentioned, most lovely people that are wonderful, it's still there, where they're like, do I trust a mom of 3 with a bunch of money to do something that's a big idea? And I have to say, I think the biggest thing that's stifling women entrepreneurs who are not just making another great brand, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's fantastic. There's a lot more permission to give capital to a woman CEO who's like, hey, I'm creating this awesome brand. Get it? Okay, that's safe. Women who are trying to be disruptive, women who are trying to rethink the way we do business, women that are trying to advocate for like something that's truly revolutionizing to existing categories. That is something that you get into trouble with. And there's a lack of permission to where you're no longer a visionary, you're a risk taker. Where if I were a guy pitching the big idea of Snacktivist, they would have given me money a long time ago. But we did finally close our convertible note round. We did oversubscribe a little bit, which was
Congratulations.
fantastic. Thank you. It was a very hard time to raise money. We opened the tranche during COVID, which was, again, horrible time to raise money. And then now, because we have some fantastic opportunities, we've dedicated the entirety of our convertible note round to developing our brand. We're totally rebranding Snacktivist. It's going to have 100% brand new logo, brand new everything very soon. Because we're branding for like what we've always wanted to do, which is we are regen for the next gen. And that's an investment. You can't do that on a shoestring. You can't do like cutting edge branding bootstrapped at home, like at 2 a.m, typical entrepreneur, like YouTube, it just doesn't work like that unless
Canva's
you
good,
go to
but
branding
it's not that good.
No, and our branding right now sucks. I think we did a good job. Like, I have a dear friend named Renee, who's a brilliant marketing person. She's got a real flair for design and she knows how to do it, but she's not a designer. She's not a brand maker. Like, we just put our heads together, and another friend, Heidi, who has the flair, and then Cam, who's another dear friend and family member who is a genius with marketing. We're like, how do we tell this story on a shoestring? Because we have $500 to get this done. And that's not to be understated. And I think that's largely reflective of like bias in capital deployment that, I think had we been able to raise money and a bigger amount of money earlier, like I think about what effect we could be having on regenerative food systems now. And I get kind of pissed off because I feel like we've been held back intentionally. And I think with women-led companies, there's more of an inclination to go, well, let's give you just a little bit. We'll write you a tiny check, not enough to really be sad about if we don't get it back. Because we really, like, what happens if your kids get COVID or school never goes back into session?
Mm.
You know, I feel like if I were a guy, they'd be like, oh, you'll see this through regardless. And I find that to be frustrating. And I wonder if they've been let down by other women founders and that maybe they were soured. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But my guess is probably not.
Yeah,
my guess is just like their wife is wonderful and she's at home and she's worried about the doilies. Like, that's what she does. Like, especially when you look at these older VC guys, I mean, their view of me is literally through the lens of what their wife and their wife's friends do.
Mm-hmm.
Guaranteed their wife and their wife's friends are not talking about assay labs on the bench and agricultural systems. They're probably talking about why their couch covers didn't come in matching last time they ordered them. And I'm not meaning to be rude. That's just, I mean, and I love these women. They're fantastic and they're lovely. But we're different breeds. And that's often gets lost in translation.
Yep. 100%.
And it might sound rude. I don't want that to sound rude. With all due respect to what these women do. It's just, it's a totally different playbook for my CEO friends, me and my pitches, that are out there hustling. And it's like, we're a different breed. And we often we just get kind of pushed in the diminutive box. My rant is over. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I've never had to be in that situation. All I can do is listen and do my best to understand and empathize and just hear you. I could imagine how frustrating that might be, but it's only my imagination. Like I have no idea what that would actually be like. But I hear I don't want to use the term anger, but when you say like you feel like you could have made a bigger impact had you not had to overcome those barriers, and like
totally. Yeah.
I almost wish, what's that horrible reality TV show? The blind singer or something like that.
The Masked Singer.
I obviously don't watch any TV. The Masked Singer. If they had like pitches like that, where there's like, there is no gender, there is no vision, it's just like somebody in a costume pitching CPG. Obviously that would not really ever take off or be a real thing, but it sounds like, it could be
an interesting concept. That's an interesting concept because it's a blind bias. And I don't ever want to be like, oh, whining about that. Cause it's not intentional usually. Like the people who are sometimes the worst about it, they're dear, lovely humans. And I love them as people. I don't think they realize they're doing it. And it's made me much more sympathetic to founders of color, founders from other like the boxes we put humans in that don't match like the norm. So whether you're, like from a community that's not typically represented in the C-suite, like no matter what that community is, and there's many different labels that go into it, there is an unconscious bias that is perceived as risky. Like you just get put in a riskier category, even if you have a sounder business plan or a higher ROI than the guy next to you.
Yeah. It's such a bummer to start at that disadvantage. But you mentioned the rebrand on the horizon. You just closed this round. Tell us what else is coming for the future of Snacktivist. What else do you have planned?
Well, we are in conversations with some fantastic retailers, and we've been trying to get their attention for so long. And frequently they'd be like, "But you're not non-GMO verified." I'm like, "We would be, except we just don't have the money to buy the seal. We're bootstrapped. Like, I either don't pay my mortgage or my car payment, or like feed my kids, or I get the non-GMO project verification." And then also, if you've never done that, we have invested as a team. We were non-GMO verified before, and then we switched co-packers and we lost it. So frustrating. So now we're redoing it again. And I think we're like well over 50 hours of just one-on-one administrative time just in jumping through the hoops. And for us, because we're trying to kick off farmer connected supply chains, like all these verification programs are static. They're designed for a linear world where there's no variability in your supply chain. So if you're like, hey, here's our Proso millet today, but we're harvesting this Proso in North Dakota with our farmer Martin, and he's going to get it milled, and we're going to, the spec sheets from the mill and the HACCP plans from the mill are here. It's like now there's a whole nother burden that could make it hard for us to keep non-GMO verification just because we can't handle the administrative burden. But then we hear from wonderful retailers, we love what you're doing, but we're not going to have you unless you're non-GMO project verified. So it puts brands like us in a really hard position. So I think we're finally having meaningful conversations with retailers there, that they're like finally believing us. I mean, we were the only food brand at Fancy Food 2020 that talked about regenerative front and center, the only one. it was like our entire booth was all about biodiversity in the ag landscape, regenerative farmer, processes, and how do we regenerate our farmlands? We're the only ones. But even still, we don't have any major retailer wins because they're like, Regena, what? Like, what?
Right.
Is there even a consumer demand for that? Like, I don't think anybody cares.
I just want to touch on something. This is the third time you've said something that made me think of like how the system is so designed to not support biodiversity. And Anthony does a really good job of frequently talking about how the system, we need to have a whole systems approach and the system shift. But when we talk about how, the whole world wants, spec, wheat, corn, and soy, you can get all those certified immediately. And then you don't have to worry about where you're sourcing what from. And everything's going to be certified. You don't have to work on like a new slotting process and new product submissions with your distributors, with your retailers, with everybody, new UPCs, new LOIs, new ingredients, new NFPs. There's just so much work that goes into making a subtle change in one ingredient on a label. And it's just like, for those who want to support biodiversity and regenerative agriculture.
The system's not set up for it.
Right. Especially right now because we don't have enough demand. Because consumers don't know what regen is, but it's hard to build that demand without the products. It's just such a difficult thing. Man, I'm exhausted just thinking about it.
I know, and that actually, that again, going back to the investor thing, like even really amazing supportive investors are like, you can't be serious. You're going to actually take this on. And I'm like, well, honestly, that part, it's as infuriating as it can be. It's like an amazing riddle with like the best prize at the end you could ever have. But being up against the retail system has been very frustrating to me because I feel like we've figured out how to kind of crack the nut on a lot of the other things, but still retailers, distributors, they're all checkbox driven. So like for us, no matter what we're pitching, like we thought we were really smart, like, and I don't tolerate wheat myself. Like I generally avoid it. I love a good beer. So if I'm going to have barley or a wheat type plant, it's going to be in the form of an IPA. That's just how I am. And so it's like, but for us, like we bring this brand and I'm like, hey, we're doing all this amazing stuff. By the way, we're gluten-free, we're vegan. We have these other things. We're top 8 allergen free. And they're like, oh, well, we don't need another gluten-free brownie mix. I'm like, did you just miss the 99% of what I just told you? Gluten-free is just an attribute that makes us acceptable to anybody. It's not our driving value. They don't care. You're a gluten-free brand. That's all you are. And so that's been the biggest struggle with penetrating the market in the retail sector is that they literally, no matter how often we tell them, we're just another gluten-free brand, which there's a lot of crappy gluten-free stuff out there. We don't need more. And most of it's just the same, nothing really innovative.
Most of it's not actually good for you.
No, it's not. Right. And so, I mean, we're like 60% whole grain on all our flour blends, like all this stuff. And so that has been a really big struggle for us with communication. Like, how do we get this across to them? Because at the end of the day, retailers are really focused, and in all fairness to them, they're running a business. Their business is based on turns, and it's real estate. And so real estate, there's only so much you can convey in that little 4-inch by 6-inch piece of real estate. And so that's why, like, we've really been more focused on online to where people could learn about what we're doing in a different setting. So, and we're just now really trying to ramp up retail. So we'll see. I mean, we'll see.
Well, speaking of ramping up, I think it'll be super interesting to get your take on this last question. And I'd love for you to answer it from a macro regen perspective and then from a grains perspective, right? So kind of two-pronged answer. We ask everybody this question, and really it's just, how do we scale this thing? So the question is, how do regen brands have 50% market share by 2050? What needs to happen?
I really think this is a very strong argument for retailers, like stepping up in a way that they've never stepped up before because of the gravity in which we're like the global situation we're up against. Like this is one situation where I feel like retailers that care need to really put their money where their mouth is and say, we're going to invest in making sure consumers understand what this is about. But we also need to be really careful that it's not just like the biggest of the big brands that are all like jumping onto regenerative, and now they just got like $80 million from the USDA to make their corn syrup regenerative. Like, that's kind of not going to help, guys. Just saying. Like, so there's going to be an interesting tension point here, but I think this is where retailers and chefs and food service places, because that's often really overlooked.
Yeah.
Chefs who are evangelizers and chefs that are influencers that can say, hey, let's honor this biodiversity as part of this regenerative goal, and let's help educate people.
Yeah, I think the retail piece is a really interesting point. And also, you mentioned the certification quote requirement beforehand. And to me, it feels like the retailers are waiting for a predominant regenerative certification to kind of own the real estate marketing for them.
Yeah, because that's the way that system's driven.
Exactly. And somebody posted something on LinkedIn yesterday. I can't remember who it was, but it talked about the 8 different regenerative certifications that are available today, which to me is not a good thing. There's a lot of people praising that and talking about it, but when there are 8 certifications for the same thing, that to me is it's going to be really difficult for any one of them to pick up enough steam. It's like the regenerative certifications are competing for regenerative market share, and it's like it's driving the issue further from where we need to be.
That's part of the same dysfunctional paradigm that's gotten us to this place. And I think that there's room for diversity in regenerative certification, because regenerative it's not as black and white as like organic. Like, you either used organic inputs or you didn't.
Exactly.
Like, it's nuanced. There's multiple drivers. For me, what would fix this would be if our really dominant regenerative certification players could get together and say, look, we are aligned in our goal that we want to make 50% of all grocery shelves regenerative by X date. We know we need to have a broader toolkit than any one certification mark can accomplish. How can we work together in a radical collaboration model where we educate the public about what regenerative is, like at a more broad brush stroke, and say the reason there are some different certifications is because different farming systems have different needs. And those consumers who care and want to take a deeper dive will. But I feel like if they could come together and get along instead of have this competitive, like, we're going to be the mark, I don't think that's going to be problematic. I think that they need to step out of their comfort zone and work together and go, at the end of the day, we need to get people clear on the big goals of regenerative and how we need to work together to make that happen, not collaborate versus compete. Like, that's going to have to happen to get over that.
Couldn't agree more.
We need, as a space, to tell a way more concise and compelling story. Like, you guys know me, I'm a content guy. And so I think highly of the content that I produce, but I think not so highly of a lot of the content in the space, because it's way too verbose. It's way too hard to understand. It's not catchy. It's not compelling. And it doesn't have the desired effect on people that we need it to have.
Yeah, we need you on our team, Anthony, because like we have literally not produced content for that very reason. Like, we've just pulled back, and like, I share content personally on LinkedIn, but it's because we've not cracked the net on how to do it and not snow people. Like, we don't have that superpower yet. I am looking for people who have that superpower that can help us break that down and make it bite-sized pieces. I know we can't do it yet, and that's why people are like, you don't do a whole lot of marketing. I'm like, it's because we haven't cracked the nut, and I think if we trudge forward aggressively right now, we'll confuse people and it will backfire. I'd almost rather just let it drift organically right now than like force something that is not well executed. Does that make sense?
No, it does make a lot of sense, for sure. And the system that you're dealing in is way more complex than a lot of the other crops and products that we're seeing in the regen space. So
it is, which is frustrating. I wish that weren't the case, but it's kind of what needs to happen. So,
but look, you're doing it. You're working your ass off, and you're making it's incremental improvement, and that's what we're all about as a space, and that's what we're all about as a show. So kudos to you for that.
Thanks. Yeah. And this fall is going to be exciting. I mean, we're going to have robot weeded regenerative sorghum that we're taking to market. And, again, we're buying, and then we've got biodynamic rock certified prosa millet. We've got regenerative garbanzo beans and sorghum that we can pull from as well, that are not they're conventional still, but they're regenerative, and they're hitting our 3B mark. So we've kind of got a spectrum going there. And, we're a small company. We can't purchase a ton. So we're going to make a purchase. We're going to use it. Mm-hmm. And then, if we have to pull back from commodity because we run out, that's what we have to do. But that's literally part of the process. Like, there's no other way to do it. We just had to take the plunge and go, you know what? I'm going to have this farmer plant this much millet. It may not get us through the year, but at least we're doing it. Like, we'll know next year how to do this better. And that's a process that also retailers are completely naive to.
Yeah. Well, look, we're excited for you. We're in your corner. We believe in you.
Thanks.
And we'll continue to support you.
Thanks.
Where can folks find more information or follow along? Like, where should we send them?
Yeah. So I always tell people, like, if they're interested in the more nerdy side, they can always follow me as a person on LinkedIn. We're going to start doing a lot more robust Snacktivist on LinkedIn. And that's really for like the ag regen side. Obviously, like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok is getting an infusion of love from a brand side. And then snacktivistfoods.com. We haven't been doing any changes to it because we're rebranding, and it seemed kind of silly to invest in that until the rebranding's done. But very exciting things are going to be coming through the next 3-4 months. And so people should follow us, sign up for our newsletter where we can keep you posted on what's going on. We don't have enough energy to spam you. So if you sign up for the newsletter, I swear there won't be a whole lot coming through.
Love that sell.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So, and if, my biggest ask to people who are listening is, like, if you're a consumer, request our products at retail, or request our products at your favorite place that you love to have breakfast, that you want a regenerative teff waffle. Like, that moves the needle more than anything. And if you're in retail, be an advocate for brands so that your companies understand who the regenerative people who are really trying to do the work are, and that they get on shelf, because that's going to be a game changer for all of us that are trying to create this category.
Great place to end. You're amazing. Yeah. We appreciate you.
Hey, thanks. Super fun to talk to you both. You're both inspirations as well. So keep up the amazing work.
Thanks, Joni. Thanks for joining us.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
For show notes and more information on our guests and what we discuss on the show, check out our website, regen-brands.com. That is regen-brands.com. You can also check out our YouTube channel, Regen Brands Podcast, for all of our episodes with both video and audio. The best way to support our work is to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to future episodes. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Regen Brands Podcast, brought to you by the Regen Coalition and Outlaw Ventures. We hope you learned something new in this episode, and it empowers you to use your voice, your time, and your dollars to help us build a better and more regenerative food system. Love you guys.